we were told here in the US by Bernie Sanders that what he wants is Swedish-style socialism. When I look at what he wants for taxes and then what Sweden has for taxes and their economic structure, I'm finding some differences there that maybe you can enlighten us on.
Yeah. In a way, I think that Bernie's right. America should be more like Sweden in many areas. In Sweden, we have reformed social security. So the pension system is now defined contributions rather than benefits, partly privatized. We have implemented lots of deregulation and competition in the public sector, for example, school vouchers, so that private schools get the same kind of public funding as the public ones. We've reduced taxations in many ways. Corporate taxes are already lower than in the United States, much lower than where Bernie Sanders would want it to go. There's no property tax, there's no tax on estates, there's no tax on inheritance. It's quite different from what the American left thinks. So the key here is that their perception of Sweden is stuck in the 1970s, just like their own policies in a way. So they think we're still the way we were back then. But we realized something back then, that it just didn't work. And sort of the background to this whole idea of thinking about peak capitalism in the 1960s and building a big government was that, well, we got cocky. Sweden was already the third or fourth richest country on the planet. After a 100-year period of small government, free trade policies, we were so rich that we just thought that now the only question is, how do we redistribute this? And that's what happened. And in 20 years, they doubled the size of government, regulated most things, and increased taxes quite a lot. And that was a period between 1970 and the beginning of the 1990s. And that's what everybody still remembers around the world. They remember that, look, Sweden is a rich country and they've implemented these almost socialist policies. It seems to be working. But nah, it's just like that old joke, how do you end up with a small fortune? Well, you start with a large fortune and then you waste most of it. And that's really what we did. This 25-year period, that wasn't the golden era in Sweden. That was our Atlas Shrugged era, when entrepreneurs and innovators left Sweden. IKEA left Sweden, the Tetra Pak companies left Sweden, investors, inventors, they all went elsewhere or just stopped doing stuff. So this was the only period in modern Swedish history where we lagged behind all the other countries and didn't create a single net job in the private sector for more than 25 years.
Wow.
It was a disaster. And don't take it from me. One famous observer said that, look, we have to realize, and especially in the early 1990s, when it all ended, it was ended with a big debt, an inflation-fueled boom. We had a big financial crisis. And then this observer said that, look, this democratic socialist experiment was absurd and perverse. And that person was the Social Democratic Minister of Finance at the time, Kjell-Olof Feldt. So from the left to the right, there was a consensus in Sweden that we're going to have to do something about this because we're going down the drain. And then we had a new reform period when we did many of these things, deregulating, opening up the economy, reducing taxes again. And after that, Sweden has come back in many areas, at least. And at least we've become an entrepreneurial country again, with many companies going global.
I think what the left doesn't really get is when they say that we want Swedish socialism, I think what they're saying is they want the outcomes of Sweden's economic policies. They don't mean that they want the economic policies that actually led to it. And that's the disconnect between people. Is they say, well, we want the social welfare state that Sweden has. And so to do that, we're going to enact Venezuela style economic policies to get there. And this is magically going to happen.
Right. No, but I think there's a reason why everybody keeps returning to Sweden and Denmark. And that's because all the other examples fail miserably. They've gone through them all. In the 50s, the Soviet Union was apparently the model, and they were going to bury us economically as well. And then, of course, that failed. But then we always have China, and Mao seems to be doing quite all right. The only good thing he ever did was to die so that they could unleash reforms and begin to reduce poverty big time. And then Cuba, then Venezuela. And it's always the same thing. Somebody talked about it as the 3 stages of socialism. First, everybody just looks at how they redistribute lots of wealth, and it seems to be making wonders in the short term. And everybody's happy. We should be like them. And then the second stage is that, oh, you begin to realize that it doesn't look very good. So you begin to say, oh, look, this is international sabotage, or they may had some problems with the weather and so on. That's probably where Venezuela is right now. And then the third stage is the collapse, like when Venezuela's per capita income drops by 75% and 7 million people flee. The third stage then is to say, oh, that wasn't real socialism. I'm not talking about that, of course not. And then they move on to the next socialist example that hasn't failed us spectacularly yet. But they'll always have Sweden and Denmark. And the only problem is that those countries aren't socialist, and in many ways, in several areas, actually more free market than the United States. So it's just a silly game of bait and switch, I think.